Evelyn Carter had learned to stop flinching when people called her reckless. Ever since the divorce, she had been branded with words: foolish, desperate, careless. Words hung in the air like cobwebs she couldn't quite shake away. The truth was simpler. She was broke. When the settlement papers had been signed, Evelyn was left with little more than a modest check that barely covered debts. Her husband had walked away clean, while she carried their 8-year-old son, Daniel, on her shoulders. Rent ate through her paycheck each month, groceries claimed the rest, and soon the numbers were bleeding red. Then she saw the ad. Coastal property for sale, needs work, price to move. It was laughably cheap, the kind of price that made you squint, wondering what was wrong with it. Evelyn drove out one Saturday, Daniel in the passenger seat clutching his battered backpack, to see it with her own eyes. The shack clung to the edge of a cliff as if it might tumble into the ocean with one strong wave. Its shingles were warped, the paint flaked like sunburnt skin, and one of the windows sagged inward. But the ocean stretched wide beyond it, endless and alive, the crash of waves pounding steady against the rocks. Daniel pressed his face to the window. "It smells like salt," he whispered, eyes wide. "Can we live here?" Evelyn studied the sagging porch, the cracked steps, the rusted hinges. It looked like ruin. Yet strangely, it also looked like freedom. A place not tied to landlords or pitying neighbors, a place she could claim. She bought it. Every last cent of her savings disappeared into the purchase. When she signed the papers, the realtor gave her a look that said your funeral. But Evelyn only tightened her grip on the pen. She had chosen. The first days were brutal. The shack was colder than she expected, the wind howling through cracks in the walls. Daniel shivered under piles of blankets, turning it into a game by pretending they were explorers trapped in the Arctic. Evelyn played along, though at night she lay awake, guilt gnawing at her. What kind of mother dragged her son into a drafty ruin on the edge of nowhere? The neighbors weren't kind either. The town of Greyhaven was small, its people rooted like barnacles. They remembered every scandal, whispered every misstep. At the local market, Evelyn overheard mutters. Bought the cliff shack? That place'll eat her alive. Divorced, alone, poor child. She straightened her shoulders and ignored them. She had weathered worse. Cleaning became their ritual. Every morning, after dropping Daniel at the small coastal school, Evelyn returned with a bucket and rags. She scrubbed mold from corners, swept sand from the floorboards, patched leaks with makeshift solutions. The shack fought her at every step, groaning as if resentful of her intrusion. One afternoon, while tugging a warped rug from the living room, Evelyn's hand caught on something odd. Beneath the floorboards, near the corner where the wall met the hearth, the wood sounded hollow. She tapped it with her knuckles, a dull echo. Frowning, she fetched a screwdriver and pried at the board. It resisted stubbornly, as if guarding its secret, but finally popped loose. Beneath was darkness, a cavity. Evelyn lowered a flashlight, her breath catching. Steps, narrow, steep, leading down into shadow. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't seen any mention of a basement in the listing. The shack was supposed to be single level, no foundation worth mentioning. Yet here was a hidden staircase, swallowed by dust. She slammed the board back into place just as Daniel burst in, waving a seashell. "Look what I found!" Evelyn forced a smile, her heart still pounding. "That's beautiful, honey." But her mind raced. Why had the basement been sealed? That night, after Daniel fell asleep, Evelyn sat by the window, staring at the restless sea. The wind rattled the glass, the waves boomed below, and the floorboard's secret throbbed in her thoughts. The shack was already full of problems: leaky roof, weak beams, thin walls. She didn't need another. And yet, she remembered the realtor's shrug. It's old. Nobody's lived there in years. Old houses hid stories, some benign, some not. Evelyn had the uneasy sense that the shack was watching her, waiting, days stretched into weeks. Evelyn found part-time work gutting fish at the docks, her hands raw from salt water, her back aching. The pay was poor, but the harbor men respected her grit. At night, she cooked whatever was cheap: mackerel fried with onions, clam soup stretched thin with rice. Daniel adapted quickly. He brought home drawings of boats, learned the names of seabirds, and came back each day with pockets full of shells and pebbles. "It's like treasure hunting," he explained, his grin missing a front tooth. Evelyn smiled, though exhaustion pulled at her bones. Still, the hidden basement gnawed at her. She dreamed of it sometimes, descending into the dark, hearing the sea roar through unseen cracks, finding what? One stormy evening, when the wind screamed and the shack trembled, Evelyn gave in. She pried up the floorboard again, heart hammering. She lowered the flashlight and took the first step down. The wood groaned under her weight. Cobwebs brushed her cheeks. The air smelled damp, tinged with salt. She descended slowly, each creak a warning. At the bottom, the light revealed stone walls slick with moisture. The room was small, carved into the cliff itself. Against one wall stood a heavy wooden door, its surface scarred with age, a rusted padlock hanging uselessly. Evelyn's breath caught. Someone had used this space once. Someone had locked it, then sealed it away. Her hand trembled on the padlock. She wanted to turn back, to reseal the board and forget. But another part of her, the part that had gambled everything on this shack, whispered, "Open it." She pulled. The lock snapped easily, long since corroded. The door groaned as it swung open, revealing darkness thick as tar. Evelyn lifted the flashlight. There, stacked neatly on shelves, were old wooden crates, nets coiled like sleeping serpents, and resting atop a barrel, a leather-bound book, swollen with damp. Her pulse thundered. She reached out with shaking hands. The cover was stamped with a name, Elias Gray. The storm raged above, rain hammering the shack, waves pounding the cliff. But Evelyn stood in the hidden basement, clutching the book of a stranger, and felt the course of her life tilt. She didn't know yet what the pages contained, but she knew, with a clarity that rooted itself deep, that she had just uncovered the secret that would decide her future. The next morning, Evelyn sat at the small kitchen table with the book spread open before her. Sunlight slanted through the salt-streaked window, illuminating damp-stained pages and faded ink. Daniel slurped cereal across from her, watching with wide eyes. "What's in it?" he asked, milk dribbling down his chin. Evelyn turned a brittle page carefully, afraid it might crumble. "Notes," she murmured. "Lots of them. Looks like Elias Gray was a fisherman." Daniel perked up. "Like the ones at the docks?" "Yes," Evelyn said softly, scanning the lines. The handwriting was small and firm, the words etched with the certainty of a man who had lived by the sea. There were sketches of nets, diagrams of tides, lists of supplies. And scattered among the practicalities were sentences that felt like whispers across time. "The ocean punishes the impatient. Watch its moods before you cast a line." Daniel leaned closer. "Is it like a treasure map?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Not exactly, but it might be even better." That evening, after Daniel was asleep, Evelyn read deeper. Elias had recorded everything. How to mend nets with scraps of twine, how to spot schools of mackerel by the way gulls circled overhead, how to salt fish so they lasted weeks without spoiling. One page listed meals for lean days: clam broth thickened with seaweed, bread stretched with mashed potatoes, crab shells boiled down for stock. Another page was marked with grease stains, notes on which baits lured which fish when storms had stirred the currents. Evelyn closed the book slowly, her mind whirling. These weren't just notes. They were survival strategies. Lessons from a man who had lived and endured on this same stretch of coast. For weeks she had felt trapped, scraping by at the docks and watching bills pile up. But what if the sea itself could provide more than wages? What if Elias's knowledge could teach her a way to carve out something sustainable? It was a fragile thought, dangerous even. But hope, once kindled, is hard to smother. The next day, Evelyn took Daniel down to the beach with a borrowed bucket and an old fishing line she found in the shack's shed. The sky was pale, the tide low. She consulted the book, tracing Elias's notes with her finger. "Clams gather near the rocks after rain. Look for the holes that bubble." Daniel crouched eagerly, poking at the sand. "Here, it bubbled." Together they dug, the sand cold under their nails. Soon they unearthed a clam, then another. Daniel whooped with delight. "Treasure!" By noon they had a small pile, not enough to sell, but enough to make dinner. Evelyn boiled them with garlic and a scrap of onion, following Elias's recipe. The broth was briny, comforting. Daniel declared it better than school lunch, which made her laugh. It wasn't profit, but it was food pulled directly from the sea, and that felt like power. Encouraged, Evelyn tried fishing next. According to Elias, mackerel could be coaxed near shore at dawn when the water glimmered silver. She rose before light, dragging herself and Daniel down to the rocky inlet. He grumbled sleepily, but his excitement sparked when gulls wheeled overhead. They cast the line again and again. Nothing bit. Evelyn's hands blistered, the cold biting her skin. After hours, she reeled in only seaweed. Daniel tried to hide his disappointment, but it clung to him like damp clothes. Maybe Elias was wrong, he muttered. No, Evelyn said firmly, though doubt gnawed at her. Maybe we just need to learn. That night she studied the book again. In the margins, Elias had scribbled, "Watch the water's color. Dark green means bait fish below. Cast then." She had missed that detail. The next morning, she tried again. When she saw the water shift to that deep green, she cast carefully. The line jerked, then pulled. Her heart leapt. With Daniel shouting encouragement, she hauled in a wriggling mackerel, silver and alive. They caught 3 more before the sun rose fully. Daniel danced on the rocks, holding the bucket aloft like a trophy. "We did it! We really did it!" Back at the shack, Evelyn grilled the fish with lemon and herbs from a neighbor's garden. The flavor was sharp, clean, triumphant. For the first time in months, she and her son ate a meal that tasted not just of survival, but of possibility. But possibility quickly collided with reality. Fishing required equipment they didn't have: nets, traps, sturdier lines. Preserving fish required salt and barrels. All of it cost money they lacked. At the docks, Evelyn asked cautiously if anyone had old gear. Some men chuckled. "A woman trying to fish? You'll be lucky to catch a cold." Others turned away. But one old fisherman, Tobias, studied her quietly. At last he said, "Gray's shack, eh? You found his book, didn't you?" Evelyn froze. "You knew him?" "Knew of him," Tobias said, his voice rough as gravel. "Man had salt in his blood, went missing in a storm years ago. Folks still tell tales. If you've got his notes, you've got a teacher. But the sea doesn't go easy on anyone, least of all those with mouths to feed." He sighed, then rummaged through his shed and handed her a battered net. "Take this. Won't last forever, but it'll do." Evelyn clutched it, gratitude swelling. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Tobias muttered. "Thank the sea if it spares you." That evening, she showed the net to Daniel. His eyes shone. "It's huge. Can we use it tomorrow?" "Yes," Evelyn said, though nerves tightened her stomach. The sea was both promise and peril. She prayed it would be kind. The next morning, they set the net in shallow water, weighting it with stones as Elias had described. They waited, the wind tugging at their clothes. Hours later, when they pulled it in, wriggling shapes filled the mesh: small crabs, a few fish, even a lobster. Daniel whooped with joy. Evelyn laughed, breathless. They had food, maybe even enough to sell a little. That night, over steaming crab broth, Daniel said solemnly, "Elias is helping us, isn't he?" Evelyn nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, sweetheart. In a way, he is." Not every attempt succeeded. Some days the nets came up empty. Once, a sudden wave knocked Evelyn onto the rocks, leaving her bruised and shaken. Another time, spoiled fish filled the shack with stench, ruining their hard-earned catch. She cried quietly that night, overwhelmed by the fragility of their progress. But each failure drove her back to the book. Elias's words offered both warning and encouragement. The sea gives and takes. Learn its moods. Respect its anger. Endure, and it will feed you. Slowly, Evelyn adapted. She learned to read the water, to time the tides, to preserve fish with layers of salt and seaweed. She bartered extra catch with neighbors for flour and vegetables. The shack, once only a burden, began to smell of smoked fish and fresh bread. Daniel thrived. He kept a notebook of his own, sketching crabs and gulls, scribbling what they learned. "Someday," he said proudly, "someone will find my notes too." Evelyn smiled, her heart aching with love. By autumn, whispers in the town shifted. People still eyed her with skepticism, but some acknowledged her effort. At the market, an old woman tasted her smoked mackerel and said, "This is honest food." A man asked if she could supply his diner with a small batch each week. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Each night, Evelyn sat by the window with Elias's book open, Daniel asleep beside her, and listened to the sea crash below. She no longer heard only threat in its roar. She heard a rhythm, a conversation, and she knew she was no longer just surviving. She was learning to live. Winter came like a clenched fist. The waves grew higher, the winds more merciless, and the shack trembled on its cliffside perch. Evelyn patched cracks with rags, stuffed towels under the door, and prayed the roof would hold. But the sea was not cruel every day. Some mornings dawned calm and silver, the tide whispering gently against the rocks. Evelyn learned to seize those hours, casting nets, hauling in fish, smoking them over driftwood fires. The salty smoke curled from the chimney, announcing to the town below that Elias Gray's shack was alive again. Daniel loved those days. He carried baskets of fish with solemn pride, his cheeks flushed from cold, his eyes bright. "We're real fishermen now," he declared one morning. Evelyn ruffled his hair, her heart swelling with both pride and fear. Because the sea always tested those who dared trust it. The storm came without warning. One evening, the horizon darkened with unnatural speed. Clouds gathered like bruises, and the wind rose in a howl. Evelyn hurried to secure the nets, her hands shaking. Daniel clung to her side, wide-eyed. "Mom, it's coming fast." "I know. Inside. Now." They scrambled into the shack just as the first wave slammed against the cliff, rattling the windows. Rain lashed the roof, seeping through cracks. Evelyn shoved furniture against the door, though she knew it was futile if the sea truly wanted them. The storm roared through the night, shaking the very bones of the shack. Evelyn held Daniel close, whispering stories to drown out the thunder. But inside, terror gnawed at her. If the shack fell, they would fall with it. At dawn, the storm relented, leaving destruction in its wake. The roof had partially collapsed, water pooled across the floor, and their supplies were soaked. Evelyn walked through the wreckage with numb steps, Daniel's small hand clutching hers. "We can fix it, right?" he asked, his voice trembling. Evelyn forced a smile. "We'll try." But when she looked at the ruined nets, the sodden barrels, the empty shelves, despair threatened to drown her. That night, she opened Elias's book again. The pages were warped from damp, the ink faded further. She turned desperately, searching for something, anything. At last, she found it. "The sea will break you before it feeds you. But remember, wreckage can be rebuilt. Nets can be knotted again. Salt and patience are stronger than storms." Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the words steady her heartbeat. Elias had endured storms. She would too. The following days were backbreaking. Evelyn salvaged what she could, drying supplies by the fire, mending nets with trembling fingers. Daniel helped tirelessly, hauling wood, patching leaks with scraps. Neighbors came, curious and pitying. Some shook their heads, told her the shack was cursed. But others surprised her. Tobias from the docks brought rope. Mrs. Rodriguez sent over blankets. A young couple patched shingles on the roof. Slowly, painfully, the shack came back to life. And when Evelyn smoked the first batch of fish after the storm, the scent drifted down the street. People followed it, hungry and hopeful. She handed out bowls of stew made from scraps, charging little, sometimes nothing. "Eat," she told them simply. "We all need to eat." Word spread, not of a cursed shack, but of a woman who fed neighbors, even when she had almost nothing. By spring, the store of salted fish had grown again. A local diner placed steady orders. Market customers returned each week, eager for her jars of pickles and smoked mackerel. Evelyn never got rich, but she no longer lay awake fearing eviction. More than that, she had earned respect. The same neighbors who once whispered now nodded in greeting, some even stopping to chat. The shack was no longer a ruin on the cliff, it was hers. One afternoon, Daniel found her staring out at the sea, Elias's book open on her lap. "Do you think he meant for us to find it?" Daniel asked softly. Evelyn touched the weathered cover. "I don't know. Maybe he just wanted someone, anyone, to carry on his knowledge." Daniel leaned against her shoulder. "Then we're part of his story now." Evelyn smiled, tears stinging her eyes. "Yes, and someday you'll tell it to someone else." Years later, people would speak of Evelyn Carter as the woman who saved the cliff shack. Not by money, not by miracle, but by grit and the lessons of a fisherman long gone. Daniel grew strong, his notebook filled with sketches and notes of his own. Tides, recipes, stories. Tourists passing through the town often asked about the small shop by the sea. They were told of the divorced mom who had found a hidden basement and a journal that changed everything. Inside the shack, framed behind glass, Elias Gray's book remained. Its ink faded, its pages fragile, but its spirit alive. Evelyn kept it there as both relic and compass, a reminder that survival is stitched from patience, knowledge, and courage. One evening, as waves glittered under the setting sun, Evelyn stood on the porch, Daniel taller beside her. She breathed in the salt air and whispered, "We made it." And for the first time in years, she felt not broken, not desperate, just whole. The sea, once a threat, had become her ally, and the shack by the sea was no longer ruin. It was home.